Now we're live for real. Let's just get the microphone in the right spot and let folks know that we're live. Oh, look at that. There's an event happening now. Hey folks, how you doing? I hear rumors that there's an error in one of my slides later on, so I'm going to go ahead and look at that. Oh yeah, there is an error. Howdy Teppa, and welcome. Glad to have you here. Hopefully you'll be able to catch more, but if not, that's quite alright. After this week's lessons, we're going to be going to an alternating schedule of noon Eastern and midnight Eastern. So hopefully they'll become a little bit more accessible to some folks. Not everybody's going to be able to attend all of them, but we do what we can. And yeah, there's going to be an error in this one later. Howdy, Old Man Cole, Marcel G, Rosenfire. Nice to see some fresh faces in the chat. We're just going to give folks a couple minutes to show up because I usually send out the broadcast announcement as I start broadcasting, and should probably do that a little bit earlier so people have time to show up before I get started. I'm going to see if I can update one of the slides before we present it so that I can fix it before I tell you wrong things. Fantastic. I'm glad that you watched the backlog. I hope to put those URLs up on the lesson pages themselves so that other folks can find them a little bit more easily in the future. Oh, hey there, No Breaks. How you doing? Teppa, I'm not gonna present wrong information. If I do, I think I was wrong once last session, and some folks were like, "Hey, you're wrong," and I was quickly corrected, and I went over my clarification and all that good stuff. Wilson Jason, hello, hello. Bush Wookie Gaming, hello from Western Oregon. Hello from Eastern Massachusetts. We got the spread of the continent over here. Hope we got some folks from other continents, so I'm excited to dive on in. Gentle Giant, welcome back. Good to see you again. Let's dive on in. So today we're going to be talking about, well, the fun part of the game. We're going to be talking about the cards themselves. So far in our lessons, we haven't really talked too much about the cards. We've mostly been talking about the rules. Before we really dive in, this is something that I'm going to address in a future lesson as part of the lesson itself. but it's part of judging philosophy that I want to impart on you, something that I think is really important, which is what we're trying to learn. And while it's really good to know interactions off the top of your head, like how Power of the Dark Side interacts with Lurking TIE Phantom, and how every other card interacts with Lurking TIE Phantom, or how cards interact with Crate Dragon, etc., etc., what is more valuable is knowing the rules behind those interactions. Because if they create another card that's similar to Lurking TIE Phantom, but has slightly different text, you need to be able to know how that works, and understanding the rules behind that helps you figure out on your own or extrapolate the correct answer without having to memorize every single interaction. As the game grows, there are going to be, I mean, there's already there's over 500 cards now, and in a year and a half, 2 years, there'll be 2,000 cards, and the rate at which the number of interactions exist will grow exponentially. Every card will interact with every other previous card, and so that makes a whole lot of interactions as we get farther down the line. And so memorizing, you don't need to memorize the rules. We have comprehensive rules that you can print out, look at, or find online. Ideally, at some point, there's a nice app that's all hyperlinked so you can jump around. But getting used to the rules and knowing the rules means that you'll be able to find the correct answer. Something that happens to me frequently when I'm judging other games is somebody will be like, hey, how do these two cards interact? And I'll look at two cards that I've never seen before, because some games, and I'm not going to mention any games that involve sorceries and wizards who live on a beachside, they've been producing a lot of cards, and there are a lot of cards that I've never seen before. But I can take two cards, I can read the two cards, and from my knowledge of the rules, come up with an answer. And that answer is correct. And if I don't know the answer, I know where to look in the comprehensive rules. So rather than talking about specific card interactions, it's good to know the fundamental rules. For this lesson, we're going to be talking about cards and card anatomy, and of course we use examples using specific cards to explain the concept, because having that context is super helpful in understanding. And we test you eventually with specific cards, because that's the context in which you'll be tested. People will ask you, how do these two cards interact? But memorizing those interactions isn't the way that you want to go. So, let's dive into some card anatomy and card types. So we're going to cover some basic concepts. If the slide wants to change... There we go, we get the slides to change. Wonderful. So we're going to cover section 1.5 of the comprehensive rules. That is cards in game concepts. And then we're going to cover card anatomy and card types, which is a fair chunk of the comprehensive rules. There are 6 card types: bases, leaders, units, upgrades, events, and tokens. They all have their own separate rules, although the token rules are treat these as the same as their other card type. Cards can have multiple card types. So far, it's just leader units and token upgrades. In Set 3 in Twilight of the Republic, we'll have token units. I'm sure having more than that at some point will be weird. I don't see bases being combined with anything. I don't see events being combined with anything. But who can say what the future will hold? Notably, resources are not a card type. They're just... I don't have a better word than type, but it is a thing that it's an attribute cards can have that's not an explicit attribute. It's based on the zone that it's in, as we covered in... Was it the previous lesson? Oh my gosh, I can't remember the order in which the lessons go. No, the next lesson is zones. Next lesson is zones. So as we'll cover in the future. There we go. I'm wide awake, folks. Resources are not a card type. Even though they'll be referred to in ways similar to card types, resources are not a card type. Alrighty. Card status. This is generally a physical trait of the cards, whether they are upright or rotated 90 degrees. There was a little bit of conversation in the lesson thread on Discord about this, about how close to 90 degrees do you have to get. You definitely don't need to bring out a protractor, and if somebody rotates their card 89 degrees, you disqualify them for cheating. That's absolutely not something you're going to do, and that's absolutely something somebody's going to clip and then tell me that I told them to do that. Please don't. Heck, even 10 or 15 degrees can be enough as long as it is clear to your opponent. If all of your readied cards are perfectly upright and all of your exhausted cards are somewhat rotated, a lot of players rotate only 30 or 45 degrees because they're lazy or doing things quickly. As long as it's clear to both players what that status is, that's okay. Are resources considered a card state? I don't believe they are. It's just that all cards in the resource zone are resources. It's a little bit weird. And resources can have card states such as ready, exhausted, and face up, face down. But resource itself is not a card state. Non-leader units and resources enter play exhausted. That just means they come into play and you can't use them immediately. And cards become ready during the ready step of the regroup phase or when instructed to do so. Chewbacca here on the screen is an example of a card that can ready at times other than the ready step. There's also face up and face down. This mostly is applicable to leaders. They have two faces that do different things depending on which face they have. There is the leader side and the leader unit side. They have at times very different abilities depending on which face is face up. Resources also are face up or face down. They're always face down in the resource zone. And captured units are also face down. The initial draft of this lesson did not include that little tidbit, so if you watched it as soon as I released it, make sure that you get that edit chucked into your brain, and we carry on from there. Now we're just going to talk about the ways in which we defeat cards. This is something that the comprehensive rules cover somewhat comprehensively. I think if you go through the entire CR, you'll find 7 different places at least that explain how units are defeated. I know that bases being defeated is explained in like 2 or 3 different spots. But only cards in play can be defeated. This is just a general rule. If you're not in play, you can't be defeated. So that's going to be bases, leaders, units, upgrades, and resources. Events cannot be defeated. Cards in your hand aren't going to be defeated. So if a card is discarded, either from your hand or from your deck, it's not defeated, it's discarded. And so when defeated, abilities won't trigger. Now, bases in particular, they're defeated when they have damage on them equal to or greater than their hit points, or HP. And when a base is defeated, its owner loses the game, and we don't have to handle anything more than that. They're very nice and clean and simple. As soon as the base is defeated, so is the player, and we don't have to worry about anything beyond that. Units are defeated in a wide variety of ways. A unit is defeated when it has damage on it equal to or greater than its HP, when it has 0 or less HP, or when it's defeated directly. If you reduce a unit's HP to less than 0, it will have enough damage on it because that amount of damage is equal to or greater than 0, and so the unit is defeated that way. If it's defeated directly, it's defeated directly. When a unit is defeated, it will go directly to your discard pile, unless it's a leader, in which case it goes back to your base zone and is exhausted, or it's a token, in which case it's set aside out of the game. However, all of these different ways in which leaders can be defeated still count as being defeated for when a unit is defeated triggers. When a unit is defeated, its constant abilities are no longer active. So that means General Dodonna being defeated means that all of your friendly rebel units immediately lose that bonus. If, for example, you had a unit that was a 2/2, getting +1 from General Dodonna, and had 2 damage on it, when General Dodonna dies, it loses that bonus and will also be immediately defeated. Lasting effects, which we cover in Lesson 6 in the future, which will be coming out on Friday, those do persist. So if you attack with Zori Bliss and she is defeated in the attack, you will still get that trigger, because that trigger occurs before the combat damage. And at the start of your group phase, that delayed effect will still occur because it was created. It is not a trigger created by Zori. It is a delayed effect that will occur later. And then Wedge, when a friendly vehicle of yours is defeated, it loses that +1/+1, doesn't have ambush, so any vehicles in your discard pile won't have those bonuses. Tepa, so can Wedge be used with Stolen Landspeeder to ambush a 2/4 and you get it? Let me just double check the exact wording on Stolen Landspeeder, because this is a problem card, and this is me going back to not memorizing cards and interactions. So, Stolen Landspeeder says, when played, if you played this unit from your hand, an opponent takes control of it. Ambush is also a triggered ability, and so you have 2 triggered abilities. You would be able to... Yeah, so the ambush and the when played happen at the same time. Since you control both triggers, you get to choose the order in which they resolve. If you resolve the ambush first, and you... Yeah, so you can absolutely have your ambush resolve first. SOAD. The active player... So, the way triggers work is a little bit complicated, and we'll get into that in Lesson 6, but for now, the active player... or each player gets to choose the order in which their triggers resolve. The active player chooses which order players will resolve their triggers. And yes, Bingo Bango Live, you can ambush it, but if it dies, you don't get the bounty. The bounty saying, if you own this unit, play it from your discard pile for free and give an experience token to it. Your opponent, the bounty will trigger, but since you control it, that you own it is going to apply to your opponent. Stolen Landspeeder is a really weird card. They don't own it, and so Stolen Landspeeder would just be defeated, and you wouldn't get it back. So short version, Stolen Landspeeder Wedge, and stealing it won't work. If it survives, it'll go over to your opponent, lose the bonus of the +1/+1, and then you would get it off the bounty. So yes, Wedge and Stolen Landspeeder does let you do some fun stuff with Han 2, the new leader from set 2. You can, and combined with Wedge Antilles, you can do it so that you can get the Stolen Landspeeder back. This is one of those interactions that a lot of judges will memorize because players would love to ask it, because it's, one of these little mind benders. And so this is a great example of, this is an interaction that you can memorize, and it's useful to memorize because people will ask you and it will come up at events, but it's better to understand the underlying rules so that when they print another card that has an effect like this or a bounty like this, you're able to answer those questions without having to memorize a whole new set of, okay, so this is how it works with Wedge Antilles, this is how it works with ambush, this is how it works without ambush, but without Wedge Antilles, this is how it works normally. So at 4122, also for effects like Jedi Lightsaber, which on attack gives -2/-2 to the defender. If that -2 reduces its HP to 0, it's immediately defeated before the combat damage. Yes, on attack effects occur before combat damage, and we resolve those fully. If any damage is dealt, or HP is modified, like off Lightsaber or off Leader Darth Vader's attack, that is all resolved before combat damage occurs. But back on target, defeating cards and units, Landspeeder is a heck of a thing. We try to keep it not too far from the front of our mind, but we try not to memorize it. Moving on to upgrades. Yes, no breaks. The timing of on-attack triggers is why Fifth Brother plays very nicely with Grit. Upgrades, resources, and tokens. Upgrades are defeated when the unit they are attached to leaves play, or when they are defeated directly. They When defeated, upgrades go to your discard pile, unless, of course, they are tokens, in which case they are set aside. Resources are only defeated when an ability defeats it directly. They don't take damage, at least for now. And tokens follow the same rules as their non-token counterparts, except they're set aside instead of put into discard. The Frosty Cliff, welcome. Glad to have you here. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, but always glad to see a new chatter. Alrighty. So that's how stuff is defeated. Generally, it's based on damage or being defeated directly, and everything other than tokens and leaders are just put into the discard pile. Abilities that are on cards in play cease immediately when they are defeated. TepaCU, you ask, do tokens get the when unit is defeated trigger? Yes, they do. They are still defeated. The condition it's looking for is if they are defeated, not if they are put into your discard pile. And so tokens will count as being defeated. They will also count as leaving play for anything that cares about that. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Heroic Resolve here that we have up on the screen is a great example of how a card's ability can outlast the card itself. This ability, defeating the Heroic Resolve, grants the unit +4 and overwhelm for the attack. By the time the attack is occurring and damage is being dealt, Heroic Resolve is in your discard pile. Or at least one of them is, because part of the cost is defeating the Heroic Resolve. However, that effect has a lingering ability, and it will continue to last until the end of that attack. The French Icon, glad to have you join us live. So currently we don't have quizzes for other lessons. We just have these live sessions and we have the lessons themselves. We're not creating quizzes for individual lessons at this point in time. It's possible in the future that that is a tool that we develop, but for now our resources are focused on creating the Judge Apprentice quiz that will be available at the end of this week. And we have to decide whether we're creating questions for that or creating questions for individual lessons. And unfortunately, we just don't have the time to create quizzes. Long term, that is absolutely something that we want to have. A great way to help people integrate the knowledge that we've just given them is give them a little quiz, something that they can work with. And we want to make sure that we're doing that in a productive way. We have an educational designer on the team, Chris Allison, and I'm going to be working with him to make sure that we have useful questions that are designed in a way to help you learn a little bit better. At no point do we intend to make lesson-based quizzes mandatory. This is because the lessons themselves aren't mandatory. If you're able to get this knowledge on your own, either through reading the comprehensive rules, playing the game, or chatting with some folks, that's a great way to learn, and you don't need to take these lessons. These are just to aid you in case you don't have local mentors around. So, we got a question. If player 1 plays Super Laser Technician, player 2 uses Traitorous as an upgrade on it, takes control of the unit, and then uses something like Palpatine's leader ability defeating Super Laser Technician, what happens first? The when this upgrade becomes unattached, or the when defeated from the unit? That is great. So these two triggers they're going to happen simultaneously. However, it doesn't. The active player, the player who played the active player, who's the player who uses Palpatine's leader ability in this case, chooses the order in which those triggers would go on the stack. However, that doesn't really matter, because by the time, no matter what happens, when this upgrade becomes unattached trigger resolves, the Super Laser Technician will have already been defeated and will be placed as a resource. So the order doesn't matter either way. Because the unit, a prerequisite of the player who currently controls the Super Laser Technician controls that trigger. Yeah, so they effectively go at the same time. But the active player chooses which order their triggers are stacked, and they control both triggers because they control both the traitoress and at the time they control the super laser technician. However, the super laser technician needs to be defeated and no longer be in play for the traitorous effect to occur. And so they're going to be getting the super laser technician no matter the way they order this. The frosty clip. Yeah, nobody gets a free pass on anything, including myself. I'm going to be taking these quizzes. I'm going to have an advantage because I'm also writing them, but no judge, whether they have experience with Star Wars Unlimited or decades of experience with another judge program, nobody's going to get to skip ahead on anything. We want to make sure that everybody's following the same path and that nobody gets an advantage and that this is a community that's open and welcome to everybody. SWU, yes, player 2 resources it even if it's a card that player 1 owns. Bushwookie Gaming, the super laser goes into the player that controls the tactician or the owner that gets it as a resource. The player that controls super laser technician, when it is defeated is the player that is going to get it as a resource. Frosty Cliff, I know you're just messing around. I'm not worried about it at all, but it is something that I want to reinforce, especially for folks who maybe don't have those opportunities or are coming to Star Wars Unlimited fresh and don't have experience as a judge. I want to make sure that everybody here feels welcome and knows that they have an equal chance and are going to be able to be certified. So absolutely no shade at you. But I also just want to make sure that everybody here is excited to be here and is going to have the same opportunities. Alrighty, moving on. Let's talk about the parts of a card. There are many parts to the card. We have name, type, traits, credit, subtitle, cost, aspects, tech box, arena type, power, hit points, power modifiers, and hit point modifiers. That's a bunch of stuff, and we're going to get to look at me put nice little purple boxes around some elements because I am a very passionate graphic designer. But let's dive into this. So every card has at least a name, type, traits, and credit. Any card can have a subtitle, costs, aspect, and text box, but aren't required to. Arena type and power only appear on units. Hit points appear only on units and bases, and power and hit point modifiers only appear on upgrades. And you can see that different cards have different layouts. I know for some people they don't like this. I've learned to love it. It lets you see what kind of things you have in your hand at a glance, and information's displayed in different ways so that it is actually pretty useful. For purposes of identification, each card's name is considered to be its English name. Names aren't exclusive. However, subtitles and different attributes can make sure that you're aware that these are in fact different cards. At some point later on, probably in a level 1 lesson, we're going to discuss uniqueness and the uniqueness rules. But the short version is you can only have one copy of a card in play at a time if it's unique, and that's indicated by the little star like you can see next to Rook on this screen. That means you can only have one Rook, Thrawn's Assassin that has this cost, types, traits, aspects, etc., etc. If they reprinted this exact Rook and named him Thrawn's Assassin, and the only thing they changed was turning him from villainous to heroic, and everything else was the same, that would still count as a different copy of Rook, and you'd be able to have villainous Rook next to heroic Rook. As a more plausible example, all of these varieties of Chewbacca that are in the game, Walking Carpet, Loyal Companion, and Pikesbane, or the various versions of Boba Fett, etc., etc., these can all be in play at the same time. There's no restriction because they are in fact different copies of the card. The names are in different locations depending on the card, particularly subtitles. Most things have their name at the top, but upgrades also have their name on the bottom. SWU, if you take control of a unique unit using Change of Heart or similar, and you already control the same unique unit with same subtitle, do you need to defeat one? Yes. You now do control 2 units with the same attributes and you do need to defeat one, you can choose to defeat the one that you just took from your opponent. Absolutely. And so effects like Change of Heart or Traitorous can effectively be removal spells on your opponent's unique characters. But of course they can be used as removal spells against your own unique characters as well. Or you can choose to have the one that you've already controlled be defeated in case the unit that they have is readied and yours is not. Traits. Traits have no inherent rules to them. This is like the Imperial on Rook, Rebel and Tactic on Rebel Assault, Learned on Academy Training. There's no inherent rules to them. Nothing that says Imperials come into play ready. Nothing that says that they cost more or less. There are no rules about any sort of trait. It's just a tool to refer to groups of cards with other cards. So, of course, y'all are familiar potentially with General Veers, who says Imperials get +1/+1. There are cards that make certain types of events cheaper, and in time there will be cards that discuss individual types of traits for upgrades. Another question from Soad. For instance, I can play Obi-Wan, then next action play another Obi-Wan unit, defeat the one from the previous action, and give experience tokens to the last played Obi-Wan. Let's just double check what Obi-Wan says, but I'm 99% sure you can. Obi-Wan says, when defeated, give 2 experience tokens to another friendly unit. If it's a Force unit, draw a card. Yes, you can absolutely do that, and because the first Obi-Wan that you sacrificed is a Force unit, you'll draw a card as well. So yeah, you can have Obi-Wan sacrifice to teach Obi-Wan. It's a little bit weird in the lore sense, but I'm sure we can figure out how time loops work. Alrighty. Aspects. There are 6 aspects. Vigilance blue, command also known as green, cunning or yellow, aggression or red, heroism white, and villainy black. Leaders and bases have their aspects in the upper right corner, and they provide these aspects to the deck. Units, events, upgrades, etc. have their aspects in the upper left corner, and are not required to have in your deck to play them, but indicate that you need to have access to them or otherwise pay a penalty when playing the card. Tefsu, I mean, then it would be Obi-Wan Kenobi? Or maybe like, I'm just getting into Legends lore here with Joruus C'baoth and Thrawn and stuff, and that's very off topic, but yes, yeah, you nerd snipe me. Cloning works. Obi-Wan featuring Obi-Wan. Great, we did it. Going back to aspects and staying on topic, and I'm going to avoid tangents. Sorry, just the number of U's that Timothy Zahn put in characters' names when he cloned them is hilarious. But aspects generally don't have any rules associated with them other than the aspect penalty. They do have mechanics in common. There are no rules that say you can't have, for example, mill in colors or discard from deck effects in colors other than blue and vigilance. There's nothing to say that you can't have various effects like adding resources to your resource pile in colors other than command, but each color has its effects that it generally has access to. Some cards have no aspects. These are considered neutral. There's no rules mechanics for neutral effects or neutral cards, but it's just a way to identify them, and it's totally okay that a card doesn't have aspects. Tepa, yes, we will be getting to events later on in this lesson. Going on to costs. Cost is the number of resources required to play the card. This can be modified by abilities or the aspect penalty. For each aspect that you're missing when you play a card, the card costs 2 additional to play. If you're missing 2 aspects, so for example, if you're playing a green, white, red deck and you're trying to play Count Dooku, you're going to be paying 4 extra because you're missing both blue and black. If you were playing a blue-white-red deck, you would only be paying an additional 2. However, free ignores all modifications. In the case of U-Wing Reinforcement, you would be able to play Count Dooku in a, say, I don't know, pulling colors out of a hat here, yellow, green, and white deck. Because we're only looking at the printed cost when we're referring to the cost of another card, and we ignore all increases and reductions to a card's cost when playing it for free. Alright, diving into card types. Card type number 1, bases. They start the game in the base zone and they never leave it, even when they're defeated. When they're defeated, so are you, and that's pretty straightforward. They take damage when attacked or dealt damage directly, and cannot be healed beyond their initial HP value. What up, Jarmor? The Frenchican, so something like Crate Dragon ignores modifications when dealing damage. Yes. Let's just pull up Crate Dragon real quick so I can see it. Crate Dragon says, when an opponent plays a card, you may deal damage equal to that card's cost to their base or a ground unit they control. So, yeah, absolutely. Crate Dragon will ignore modifications. So, for example, if you have a Crate Dragon, your opponent plays U-Wing Reinforcement, and then Count Dooku, you'll get the 7 off U-Wing Reinforcement and the 7 off Count Dooku, even though they played Count Dooku for free. So you get to do a total of 14 damage with your Crate Dragon, which maybe you don't play U-Wing Reinforcement into a Crate Dragon. That's not outside assistant, that's just a suggestion. Frosty Clip, what is aggression and cunning's things? Command is resource, vigilance is control, and discard from deck. Aggression is generally, they have a bunch of card draw effects, and having more aggressively statted units that are generally, I think ambush is a little bit more common there, and like units that are cheaper. I think they also have direct damage on events. And then Cunning has a lot of tricks. They have a lot of effects that return units to players' hands. That's a mechanic that shows up a lot. If you look at the cards you have, you'll be able to build up a portfolio and see what sorts of things different cards can do. Yes, the Frenchkin. Even if it's free, it deals damage. SWU. If a card says, for example, reduces its cost by 3 resources, that includes aspect penalty or just printed cost. So the way that we're going to talk about cost, and we'll get to this later, I think in lesson 6, you start with the printed cost. You add any cost increases, whether it be from abilities or from aspect penalty, and then any cost reduction. So any cost reduction will apply to the aspect penalty as well. And so if you have something that costs 1 that has an aspect penalty of 2, and you have an effect that will reduce its cost by 3, you'll end up paying 0 resources for that. Does that make sense? And yeah, blame it on lag. Lots of tricks, bouncing, resetting, power increases or decreases. Yeah, a lot of stuff like that. If you look at the card Cunning, that's actually a pretty good job of explaining what is going up with that. And yeah, the French can basically discount is always last. The way I think of it is printed cost, then any additions, then any subtractions, and then finally we set it to free. There's something about additional costs. Currently there's only 1 additional cost in the game coming from Saw Gerrera, which says events, I believe it's events your opponents play have an additional cost of take 2 damage. Let me just pull that up and take a quick look at it. Yes, as an additional cost for each opponent to play an event, they must deal 2 damage to their base. Additional costs are separate from cost modifiers, and that will occur after you've done all of the totaling up. Alrighty, bases. Leaders! Everybody loves a leader. They also start the game in the base zone just like bases. However, unlike bases, they can leave the base zone once per game, and they're deployed to the appropriate arena. I say that because I really want there to be space leaders, and we haven't had them yet, and I want them. I don't have any special knowledge. I'm just leaving this open so that when they do finally please give me space leaders, I want them. JFreak7 asks, is Cura an additional cost, or is extra not considered additional? It is a modifier. So it is considered a cost modification, not an additional cost. And so it's part of the printed cost, including modifiers, cost increases, cost decreases. So it is as part of the total cost process, not added on at the end. Leaders are deployed from the base zone. Jumping back to this for a second. When they're deployed, they are deployed ready from the base zone into the appropriate arena, and when defeated, they return to the base zone exhausted. Otherwise, they're treated like a unit while in the arena. They can be upgraded, they can be exhausted. If they would leave the arena for any reason, they are instead defeated. If a player would take control of a leader that they don't already control, they are immediately defeated. So you can't steal your opponent's leader no matter how hard you try. You can't return it to their hand and make it unable to be played. SWU. So if player 1 has 2 life and plays Vigilance choosing heal and something else, and player 2 has Saw Gerrera, player 1 would die and the heal would not happen because player 1 loses. Yes, that is correct. So when a card says if you control, that refers to control the card as a leader or as a unit. Yes. So if it says if you control card name, unless it specifies as a unit, it is any card that has that name that you control. So as an upgrade, unit, or leader, or base, I guess, would meet that requirement. However, it's very unlikely that you'll control, say, Moff Gideon as a base or an upgrade, at least for now. Maybe someday you'll be able to get Moff Gideon himself as a jetpack, but it refers to any card type that you control. Firespray does have that reminder text, and as does Gideon's Light Cruiser and a couple other cards that refer to other cards by name. However, as a reminder text doesn't overrule the comprehensive rules, and so while in this case the reminder text is correct, the comprehensive rules are a little bit more comprehensive. Alrighty. Units. Units are played to an arena, either space or ground. They enter play exhausted and remain in play until defeated. When defeated, they go to discard. While ready, they can attack units in the same arena, or they can attack bases, with of course the exceptions of Sentinel. They have to attack an enemy unit, they can't have Entrench on them, etc, etc, etc. They can also use their abilities. If a unit has an action ability that of any sort that doesn't require it to be exhausted, those can still be used when it's exhausted. So something like Crosshair's first ability that allows you to increase its power is something that you could activate the turn that you played it, and Crosshair was exhausted. That's the word I was looking for. Crosshair's action of pay 2 resources, this unit gets +1/+1 for this phase, is something you can do the turn you play him, and then play Strike True to deal damage equal to the power of a unit you control to another unit. That is something that you can do to, even though Crosshair is exhausted. And so if you really try and work around it, you can find ways to effectively get into some damage, but not actually attack with the unit. Upgrades. Upgrades are played from a hand. They are attached to a unit. All upgrades do have an attachment requirement. They must be attached to a unit. You can't just play an upgrade, get its when played effect if you don't have a unit to attach it to. You can attach them to enemy units even if they are beneficial, and attachment requirements are only checked when the upgrade is played. In this example here, you play Legal Authority on your Reinforcement Walker, which is a friendly unit, and then your opponent plays Choose Sides. Now they control your Reinforcement Walker. Legal Authority remains attached even though the Reinforcement Walker is no longer a friendly unit for you. All upgrades have power and HP modifiers, although many of them, especially bounties, don't actually have any effective modifier. They just have modifiers of 0. These modifiers, like with costs, are cumulative. You just add them all up or subtract them, although I don't believe we have any negative modifiers just yet. Now, some upgrades grant abilities to the unit, while other upgrades apply rules to the unit. The comparison here is Vambrace Grapple Shot and Entrenched. SWU, what happens if the unit I exchange has captured a unit? That is a wonderful question. I'm not as familiar with the rules on capture as I would like to be. So I'm going to do a quick little thing where I pull up the comprehensive rules, and we'll circle back to that later on in this lesson. Sound good? Because I don't have that answer off the top of my head, and I don't want to spend just like a minute scrolling through the comprehensive rules to get an answer while we have a live audience. My presumption is that it stays, because I don't think captured has anything to do with friendly or enemy, but I want to double check that. Alrighty, upgrades. Yes, that's where we were. I remember what I was talking about. So, Vambrace Grapple Shot gives the unit the ability. So if you have a Vambrace Grapple Shot, attach unit gains, on attack, exhaust the defender. If Gideon Hask loses all of his abilities, say from Force Lightning, he'll lose the when an enemy unit is defeated, and lose the on attack, exhaust the defender. He will keep the +2/+2 from Grapple Shot, because that is not an ability that Gideon Hask has. That is simply a modifier to his power and hit points. On the other hand, Entrenched doesn't grant Gideon Hask an ability. It just says that the attached unit can't attack bases. So if you use Force Lightning on Gideon Hask, who's upgraded with Entrenched, Gideon Hask still cannot attack bases. Entrenched would have to say something along the lines of attached unit gains, this unit can't attack bases, which is a little bit wordy for what is frequently going to be the same thing, although in some cases, in the case of Force Lightning, it is functionally different. It looks like we have a couple of folks saying that the captured unit stays. That lines up with my recollection, and I've seen both CM and JFreak chat on before, and they are reliable sources, so I would trust them until we say otherwise. I'm still going to go over the rules anyways, because I just want to see what the rules say exactly about capturing units moving around, but that's something that we can generally rely on. Moving on to events. Events are played from hand. They go to the discard pile before resolving, and you can play an event that does nothing to alter the game state. If you have no cards in your hand, you can play Remnant Reserves to... if you have no cards in your deck, you can play Remnant Reserves to effectively do nothing. You also do as much as you can when playing an event. If you have, say, only 2 cards in your deck when you play Remnant Reserves, you'll search the top 2 cards, because that's all you can do. Now, we did have someone who's going to ask a question about events. SWU, go ahead and ask your question about events, because this is what we got on events in this lesson. I do want to point out that, as I mentioned, events go to the discard pile before resolving. So Restock, which says choose, I believe, up to 4 cards in a discard pile and put them in random order on the bottom of that their owner's deck. Restock can select itself, because the first thing that happens with an event before it resolves is it goes into your discard pile, and then you can select it as part of its resolution. Yeah, SWU. So you can recur an event to your hand and deck, with Restock being particularly notable in that it can recur itself, and can do that. Yeah, Restock is very playable. Potato in a Box, learning that you can play events for no effect broke me. It feels like it goes against the do as much as you can idea. I mean, you do as much as you can. It's just that you can do nothing. You have changed the game state. You have exhausted the resources to play it, and the card has gone to your discard pile. So, and yeah, as Soad brings up, Relentless says the first event played by each opponent each round loses all abilities. So, if you have a card that does nothing effectively, if it's defeating units that you don't meet the restrictions of, or drawing cards from an empty deck, you can play that, have it be neutered by Relentless, and then continue to play events. You don't need to worry about every event always doing something. SWU, does it work, for example, if I got Street Gang Recruiter, would it die immediately as it enters? Let me just double check. Street Gang. In the future, this is something that I'm noticing. I'm going to need to have a way to pull up cards on stream so that as I look them up, you too can see what I'm talking about, rather than just me reading a card. No, so this sort of recursion doesn't work with Street Gang Recruiter. Let's see. No, it doesn't work with Street Gang Recruiter if it were to die immediately when played. Because if it dies immediately, it will, I believe, die before the trigger resolves. I would have to double check the rules on that. And the timing on that. The rules on the timing of units being defeated isn't super clear, especially because they're making some weird space to make sure that Snoke in particular acts the way that they want him to. So I don't have an answer for you. That is a very good question. If Street Gang Recruiter were to die immediately, I believe you would be able to, because the trigger would occur, Street Gang Recruiter dies, and then you look to your discard pile and says, hey, return Underworld card from your discard pile to your hand. Street Gang Recruiter is there, and you could recur them. I blame it on lag. Yes, exactly. If there's a unit on the field and you play Vanquish, you have to destroy the unit. You can't play Vanquish and do nothing. And I'll look into the OBS overlay thing in the future, because that's great. Where's my brain going? It's been a long day. Oh, right. Speaking of you have to destroy a unit and Vanquish. This is something that I've talked with FFG about. This is going to be going on a completely different topic. We're not talking about rules right now. We're going to be talking about tournament policy. If I play Vanquish and say, I'm going to destroy your leader, I'm going to destroy your Boba leader, and your opponent says, hey, this is a leader, you can't destroy it with Vanquish, but you do have your own Avenger that you can destroy. What has happened here is a player has taken an illegal action. They have chosen a unit that they cannot choose with Vanquish, and the entire action is rewound. This means that the player who played Vanquish is not required to target their own unit with Vanquish. The Vanquish is returned to their hand, and their resources are readied. So if a player takes an illegal action, we don't hold them to part of that action. We undo the entire thing. And that's something that I'm going to repeat a couple of times, because I know that there is a lack of clarity in that policy, and I want to make sure that folks are on the same page as Fantasy Flight and our folks here at Cascade Games. The goal of the policy here, and this is something that I want to get out in a more formal and a written form sooner rather than later, the goal of the policy is that games play out as close to reality as possible, and players are able to play the game that they want to play. I hope to have some policy clarifications coming to you folks sooner, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, ideally definitely before the October planetary qualifiers. FFG is also working on getting these updates put together. There's some challenges in making sure that policy philosophy is where they want it to be and everybody's on the same page. Because if we start teaching people one thing and then we say, actually, never mind, if anybody even breathes the wrong way or exhausts their unit by turning them left instead of right, we DQ them immediately. We don't want judges running around with incorrect information, and so we're going to be a little bit restrained on releasing updates, but I'm willing to push information out there and make updates and clarifications as required, just so that you have an idea of the philosophy that we're going in. TPCU, thank you for checking in. Sleep well. We'll talk to you later. Moving on. Tokens. Tokens are always created by the resolution of abilities. They always have a second type, and they are treated as though they were that type other than for the fact that they are set aside from the game rather than leaving play. So if they're returned to hand, or defeated, or would somehow be put back into the deck, they instead are just set aside from the game. They can switch sides. One player can take control of another player's tokens, but other than that, they're pretty straightforward. Right, so we talked about card types a lot, and we're still talking about card anatomy. In one of our future lessons, we're going to go into more detail on how we play cards, and so some of the questions that you may have might be answered there. Units have an arena, either ground or space. I can't wait for the day that a unit is both ground and space. I'm sure we'll have one eventually because that's design space that somebody will touch, but it probably will be a few years. In any case, the ground and space arena are decided with the first unit played. Units can only attack other units in their arena or the base. We'll talk a little bit more about this in attacks in Lesson 6, about how you can damage units from across bases, Admiral Akbar, our good old gunship, etc., etc. J-Freak always has a second type, means it's a token and a different type in addition, right? Yes. Unit for the next set, upgrades for the first two sets. You'll never just have something that exists and its type line is token. It's possible that you might get token resources that are treated differently than other cards. I don't really see token leaders or token bases existing. That'd be real weird. But token upgrades and token units are what we're going to be seeing for now. Power, HP, power, and HP modifiers. All units have power and HP. If they don't have them, they don't really do their job as units. Abilities will always check for current power after modifiers. Abilities, on the other hand, will always check for default. By default, they check for total HP after modifiers. However, pretty much every ability will specify that it is looking for remaining HP after modifiers and damage. It's important to read because there is printed power and current power, and then printed HP, current HP, and remaining HP, which are all different stats that are all derived from the same base HP. It's just something to be aware of. HP is, of course, how much damage a unit can take before it's defeated. When you're healing a unit, you can only heal an amount of damage that is on it. And so if you have a Crate Dragon that has 4 damage marked on it and you play Redemption, you will not be able to heal your Crate Dragon up to 14. You will not be able to deal 8 damage to your Redemption. You can only heal damage that has been dealt. Alrighty, and that's bringing us close to the end. We have text box, which has various card abilities. All sorts of things can happen in here. There are action abilities, constant abilities, event, keyword, and triggered abilities, as well as lingering effects, delayed effects, and replacement effects. Sometimes there will be text, italicized text in parentheses, like that example. That's reminder text. As a reminder about reminder text is not actually the full rules of whatever the mechanic is. It's just a gentle reminder of, hey, by the way, this is how this works. You're always going to want to refer to the comprehensive rules in case you have more complex questions. Finally, the last thing that we have on the card is the credit line. It is not part of a card's attributes and does not impact gameplay at all. This includes artist, licensing information, set abbreviation, language, rarity, set number, that sort of thing. And that about wraps us up. This is a great chance if you have any more questions that you want to ask, go ahead and throw them in the chat. I'll give them a quick little read as I go over the comprehensive rules and read capture real quick. The other thing that I want to point out is that tomorrow at the same time, whatever time zone you're in, we're going to... Yes, J-Freak, no impact until the unset comes out. But tomorrow we're going to have an AMA and an AUA, Ask Us Anything, with Tim Shields, the CEO, and Chris Allison, our Vice President of Operations, as well as myself, running the whole thing here on this same Twitch channel. If you have any questions for that AMA, please go ahead and toss them into the AMA thread up on the Discord. That way we can take a look at them in advance. However, if you want to surprise us tomorrow evening, afternoon, morning, whatever time it is, wherever you are, You can feel free to show up in the chat and throw those questions to us then, and we'll go with them with whatever preparation we're able to have. With that being said, looks like we don't have any further questions, so I'm just going to go ahead, go through here and read capture real quick, because I was reading it earlier today, and let's see. Placed face down under the capturing unit, and it's considered out of play. Yep, there's absolutely nothing under capture that cares about enemy or friendly for the capturing of it. Which is, I wonder if there are any cards that let you capture your own units so as to like protect them from a super laser blast that you're going to play later. That's probably something that they've thought of, and if it doesn't exist yet, I'm sure it'll exist in the future. Anyways, with all of that, we're going to just transition back to my face, say thank you all so much for joining me. I'll see you all tomorrow, or if you're not able to make it tomorrow, we're going to have another live broadcast for lesson number 5 on Wednesday, and then on Friday we're going to have lesson number 6, and we're going to do that broadcast then. However, I feel like not a lot of people are going to show up for lesson number 6, because at around the same time we're going to be releasing the quiz for Judge Apprentice certification, and I feel like a bunch of people who might want to show up to this live broadcast might also want to just take that certification and get that certification on their account as soon as possible. Thank you all so much for showing up, thank you all for chatting, thank you all for your questions, and I'll see you next time.